Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. My name is Brandon, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. The mission of Free State Colorado is to promote a culture of liberty, freedom of the individual, and a free market. Today, I'm joined by Representative Ken DeGraaf, one of Colorado's liberty leaders in the state legislature. Representative DeGraaf represents House District 22 in El Paso County and is a 27-year Air Force veteran. Out of Colorado's 100 legislators, he was one of only two to earn an A rating by Liberty Scorecard Colorado for the 2023 session. He is also the sponsor of some of the most pro-liberty legislation introduced in 2023. Well, Representative DeGraaf, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here. Nice to chat with you finally.
Well, this was your first year in the State House, and what surprised you the most as the legislative session began in January?
I'd say the tyranny of the majority is built into the name, founding, and history of the Democrat Party, and we saw that played out with the 14th and Rule 14 and Rule 16, kind of to a surprising degree that they were willing to hear our voice and that of our constituents to the minimum level possible, but beyond that, they weren't interested. And if you look at the faction, the group that they had break off on the last night, they thought that their more radical elements thought the amount we'd been allowed to participate was excessive. So I think that's pretty telling. So that was disappointing. Let's see what else. I'd consider them. I thought there'd be a little bit more statesmanship. I'd heard it referred to as a Gold Dome high school, and that played out, unfortunately. I was expecting the cesspool. I mean, I considered it looking at previous legislation, the Gold Dome cesspool is what I'd consider it, and that was, that played out when you look at their promotion of feticide and the usurpation of parental rights that they really couldn't tolerate having those. So, well, the promotion of what I'd say the fetal harvesting industry that they promote, just without any sort of limitations, that's surprising. That's shocking. The continual push for centralized government, for increasing state power, increasing centralization of power and rulemaking, which really upends the entire idea of our republic, where the individual is sovereign and that the layers of government support and secure that sovereignty, all the way down to the governor should be supporting the state assembly, and the state assembly should be supporting local government, and local government should be supporting. So those are all underneath. But instead, what we have is a governor who's dictating, so who's making himself a dictator by sending policy to the legislation that. And saying this is what you're going to impose onto the people of Colorado. So that was surprising as well. The overall disdain that the Democrats have for the Constitution, and I'd say that's based on historical ignorance. From conversations that have come up around the conversation. Around the Constitution, and just being historically inaccurate in general, which is unfortunately. And then of course, when we get into things like talking about climate and carbon dioxide and energy and all that, they're not only scientifically ignorant, but they're scientifically incurious. They're not interested in anything that would challenge their mindset. They're only interested in promoting their agenda, and they recognize that their power, even if they have doubts at some level, they recognize that their power base comes from the ignorant extremist, and that's who keeps them in power. So, in a sense, I expected that, but to the level, the level it surprised me. And then, nice people in general, some of them not so much, but nice people in general. So that makes it a little bit. Kind of throws you off balance, since there are people that you oppose ideologically, but and then policy wise, and then you have otherwise casual conversations with. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
The ending of the legislative session was really telling, as you said, this idea that these politicians, these legislators are supposed to be representing the people, are supposed to follow a process that allows for public input, for debate, for expert testimony over some of these very important issues. And this last week of the legislative session, as we saw, the Democrats weren't interested in that. They just rammed it through. They gave no opportunity for actual discussion or even reading and understanding the bills they were pushing. I mean, what an egregious subversion of our democracy that these Democrats claim to represent.
Yeah, they took an oath to it, and we remind them that they pledge allegiance to it every day, and that's to the idea that the individual is sovereign over the state, and everything they promote is making the state sovereign over the individual. So those are just pointing that out. And it's not so much on the last day that they were uninterested. They were uninterested the rest of the time as well. They just became less tolerant because, of course, by law, everything had to be wrapped up by midnight. So they were not going to allow their agenda to not, the polis agenda to not be, and they didn't understand it. They got their sound bites, and they had been, but there was no, there was no analysis on their part. They just took the advice and the word of the people that would either give them money or primary them if they didn't play along. So they just went along with that. And then on the last day, there was just no tolerance, because of the time constraints. So they just made it very, very clear that it was going to be very heavy-handed and rammed through.
How frequently do you think that these legislators are ignorant of the bills they're actually voting for?
I think in general, if you look at the, if you watch the House floor, it's really unfortunate that the camera doesn't point the other direction, that there's not a camera pointing the other direction. It's only pointing at the podium and the speaker. And even when the chair has to, say, hey, it's getting too loud, I can't hear, you need to take your conversations outside. There are people that are just off in the wings. They're at their desks. They're not listening to the debate. They're not listening to the reasons that we're speaking out against a bill. They're having their side conversations. They're joking. They're laughing, and wheeling and dealing, and otherwise they're not engaged in the actual process. As I explained in my appeal letter from when the Speaker of the House had me leave the dais there, that what is supposed to happen is that second readings, committee hearings give everything the first reading, as you know, but those are just more of an ideological filter, and those are just kind of they're essentially at this point, I'd say they're all kill committees. They're just going to filter ideologically. But when something reaches the floor for the second reading, and in committee they'll say, well, I think this should go to the floor. But when it gets to the floor, they say, well, this passed through committee, so we should just vote for it. Well, the committee doesn't give it a high degree of scrutiny. We just have witnesses' testimony that's typically limited to 2 minutes, and panels of 8 that are limited, or panels of 4 or 5 that are limited to 8 to 10 minutes for question and answer. So there's not really any sort of in-depth scrutiny on the in the committee level, and on the floor, we should have the floor really allows for unlimited debate. And then the third readings, it should allow for 10 minutes of closing comments and closing arguments before the vote. So what's really not standard is that, we try to pass through, 700 bills in a year. If you ask anybody, by the rules that we have, you should probably get, you could maybe get, 50 good laws if they were actually vetted and considered, but instead they are they're really just rammed through with very little consideration. Now, one thing we're not allowed to do is filibuster and, like, read the phone book or something like that, which I'm pretty happy with. You have to stay on topic. And but and that's what we've done. You go up there and you speak to the Republican principles, you speak to the constitutionality, you bring evidence, you bring articles, and you present all that, and then the Democrats just come up and say, well, I recommend no. And then everybody votes for the Democrat because that's the bill sponsor. They weren't paying attention anyways. And and typically it goes according to their script.
It might be a little disheartening for some political science majors out there or high school civics students to hear that the process is not like they hear in the textbooks. It's not this statesmanship, as you said, where people come together, debate these bills, really go through and scrutinize them and look at the process. It's very unfortunate that it's really the majority just decides what their agenda is and rams it through.
Well, and that's because they have a super majority in the House. The representation, they feel with their 70%. I think it was, I didn't do the math on this one, but 70% representation in the House, even though if you look at the overall vote, it was about 54%. So they did have a mandate, but it wasn't a landslide mandate. But now they take their super majority and consider it a landslide mandate, and that and consider that everything that they have, that all of their ideas are what the state of Colorado has mandated. And so they just ram it through, whether it's constitutional or not, doesn't matter. That's irrelevant.
Seems like they're more interested in governing over us rather than representing us.
Well, yeah, I would consider it government done to the people instead of for the people.
Well, you've set yourself apart from the majority of your colleagues by sponsoring pro-liberty legislation. What are the driving principles behind your decision-making and voting in the legislature?
Well, I think on the Second Amendment Preservation Act was one that passed in other states, and in discussing that, and I thought it was a good starting point. And the interesting thing about that one is that it did not get rid of any of the anti-Second Amendment laws. It either federal or state. What it did was it said, hey, Colorado is a sovereign state, or I would say at this point with the supremacy clause, a semi-sovereign state. And we have our own legislature, we have our own laws, and we have our own law enforcement. So we'll enforce the laws that are put in place by the Colorado legislature. And that if it's something that's important at the federal level, we can't stop it because of the supremacy clause, but we can just say we're not going to use our resources to enforce federal laws. And that was we won't stop them from being enforced, but we won't help with their enforcement. We won't use state assets in the enforcement of federal laws. And I thought it was telling. So that one was really more of hey, the state is sovereign, and we need to maintain some level of our sovereignty before we lose it all. And the Democrats voted, of course, against that and voted for more centralized control, even at the federal level. Another one was the due process asset forfeiture, and sometimes that's called criminal asset forfeiture instead of civil asset forfeiture. And that one was, it was just one that I'd heard about for a long time, and that by the Fifth and 14th Amendments, you shouldn't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. And the civil process isn't due process. So making it part of the criminal proceedings. So it would be in the sentencing phase, that any materials that were seized would be part of the sentencing. Instead, right now there's two parallel systems. The material that's seized goes in through the civil track, and then the individual goes into the criminal track. And they will say that, well, nothing should happen until there's a criminal conviction, but quite often it does, because it's in the civil side. And then they say, well, this person hasn't been here they haven't come here to claim their property, so they must not want it. So the title is transferred and then it's sold or whatever. And then it's just, the average is less than $800. So, somebody's not going to be able to afford $3,000 in legal fees to recover something that's worth less than $800. So, and sometimes that's a vehicle. Sometimes that's, and the vehicle of somebody who's ultimately found innocent, and then then they're taken out of the workforce. They can't get their kids to school. They can't get to medical appointments. They can't get to work. They can't participate as needed, and it just creates more of a problem. That would not have gotten rid of the asset forfeiture. It would have just made it as part of the due process, in accordance with the Fifth and 14th Amendments. So those were, I think, those were the key ones.
One of the other bills that you sponsored this year I found really interesting. And, the Democrats have been using the threat of climate change to push an agenda that totally threatens our way of life. So you sponsored House Bill 23-1163 to revoke carbon dioxide status as a pollutant. What effect would this bill have had on the state's green agenda?
Well, actually, I think it would improve the green agenda, because right now the only thing green about the green agenda is the flow of dollars from taxpayers to China, and to politicians who are happy to tell you what they'll tell you what they say science says. And if you actually look at the science, it's they don't say that. There's really no basis for carbon dioxide as being an existential threat. So usually by the time you hear that, you're hearing what the IPCC says, and then what somebody says the IPCC says, and then what somebody says the IPCC says. So if you look at first sources, you'll typically find much more moderated. And if you listen to, and I can send you some links on this if people are interested, scientists like Dr. Lindzen of MIT, Dr. Happer of Princeton, Dr. Moore of a co-founder of Greenpeace, Dr. Robinson, who's a legislator in Oregon, a senator in Oregon right now, Dr. Hayden, who's who's been a great resource for presentations, living in Pueblo. So some really solid scientists. So if you got, and overall, what we're looking at with carbon dioxide, we're looking at, we started off when they started direct measurements at 300 parts per million roughly. Now we're at around 400 parts per million. And 200 parts per million is where plants start breaking down. And 1500 parts per million is kind of an optimum level. So after the mini ice age that we have, the temperature is warming because of the sun, and carbon dioxide is following that warming, which has also caused about a 50%. I think they cite about a 50% increase in leaf mass. So where the carbon dioxide is more of it is following the temperature, is following the warming, as opposed to the warming following the temperature. So, and the increase in carbon dioxide is an increase in leaf mass, and and an increase in general of human thriving. Humans thrive during the warm periods of history, not the cold periods. If we'd gone the other way, continued to go the other way, as Dr. Moore makes the point, and also Freeman Dyson, that going the other way by another 100 parts per million, or really one molecule in 10,000. If we've moved from 3 molecules in 10,000 to 4 molecules in 10,000. If we'd gone from 3 molecules to 2 molecules in 10,000 of carbon dioxide, you'd be looking at large scale plant death and increased famine, like during the dark ages and stuff. So it would be so CO2 is green. CO2 is green. We can we definitely need more of it. And we don't need to cover the United States in solar panels, and we don't need to pump hundreds of billions of dollars of CO2 into the ground.
Right. Yeah. CO2 is plant food. So what do these legislators have against plants? They want to starve the plants of their ability to thrive.
That's true. And when you bring that up again, there's some interest, but they are kept in power by people that they are also incurious. When you go through the math of evaporation and infrared being water vapor, being absorbed by water vapor and carbon dioxide, and then that we present about that human-made carbon dioxide accounts for about 1% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and of that the United States is about 15% of that. If you combine all those percentages, you get down to about 0.007%, which is just a little less than 1 part in 10,000. So the atmospheric energy that you experience is about one part in 10,000 of carbon attributable, I'd say mathematically attributable to the carbon dioxide that's produced by the United States, and of which your personal contribution would be 1 part in 330 million of that. So it just gets to be a lot of zeros. So I stop at 1 part in 10,000 for the United States. And even then, when you mention that to somebody, even if they're not willing to refute it, they'll just say, well, we have to do something. So we have to do 1 part in 10,000. And so we have to make these extreme cases. So the, logic is left the building, or as I told one of my friend Ty Winter, he continues to throw it back at me when I'd get frustrated on the committee hearings. He would just pass my saying back to me and say, in the church of woke, facts don't matter, and in the sense of climate, facts absolutely do not matter. It's all about promoting an ideology.
That's interesting. Kind of reminds me of this broader point, this idea that, where did we go wrong? Where is our country going wrong? And maybe that's one of the keys, in our state and our country as a whole, is this idea when facts stop mattering, when it stops making a difference what's right or wrong or what's true or false, and instead it all adheres to a total ideological agenda separate from reality and unwilling to consider reality. I mean, that's just a total recipe for civilizational disaster. How can a society last if truth is not recognized?
Well, I think some of that it gets to the point of the idea of engagement. And one thing I try to emphasize is that we've spent so much time with this climate thing, this climate ideology, not combating the climate ideology, but tolerating it in the sense that you think at some level that sanity will prevail, and it's not prevailing. It's not prevailing. It is getting worse. So you can't we can't just sit back and say, well, I don't want to get engaged. They'll shut me down or something like that. It's true. It's good to have your facts about you. But we can't just disengage in that regard, because they're not, there's not being satisfied with a certain level. It's always incremental. And so it's just growing. That I think some industries, especially oil and gas, think that, hey, eventually, they're going to come around and they'll realize what's going on. And it's like, no, it's not there. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to pass legislation that will make it so even that when you do, if sanity does prevail, that it'll be too late. So we have to be engaged in this stuff, because it is not going away. It's just nothing that they achieve is an end goal. Everything that they achieve is a step towards the next. So that's one of the reasons that we need to be engaged, because you have to actually put we have to, we have to put sandbags around this. We have to stop the flood.
No, that's a great point. And I think that's something people really need to realize. A lot of people don't want to engage in the political process. They want to sit back and say, hey, I can't do anything about it, or just feel so discouraged that they're not even going to try. But as you said, the end goals have not been achieved. And the end goal of potentially could be mass starvation. I mean, genocide, without sounding total apocalyptic here, some of these policies, as we've seen in other countries and throughout history, just lead to just human suffering. And it's very unfortunate. So, real call to action for people to get engaged and to become a little bit more active in their local political systems.
Well, and I actually downloaded the magazine and the article, and it was 1992 as a spokesman for UNESCO. That Jacques Cousteau noted that we need an additional 350,000 people a day to die. And he said, which would be a reason for maybe not curing all the viruses, because we need more people to die, not less people to die. And now he did caveat that, fortunately, that was a completely terrible idea, terrible and unspeakable idea, but it was Jacques Cousteau, and it was in the UNESCO Courier in 1992, November, I think. And that's the mentality behind it. So I think a lot of it is, like, if you look at, like, in Polis's State of the State address at the beginning of the year, he hinted pretty strongly that there would be a push for centralized zoning. And of course, we didn't get that until the waning hours of 213, not really enough for people to get engaged and all that. And then you have the additional millions of dollars that they spent, and they want to spend on buses to somehow combat the ozone problem. So that's why I called the Bozone Bill, because they were trying to combat ozone by increasing free ridership. So they have this idea. If you look at the combination, it's like they want to subdivide all the properties near transit so that they can cram more taxpayers in, because that agenda is not really that you have. But if you look at, if you go back to Marx, that work becomes your only desire. You just work for the sake of promoting the state. So you cram as many of these taxpayers into as small area as possible, and then all of a sudden, mass transit becomes more viable, because right now mass transit is subsidized at $2 per passenger mile. So when we looked at, I thought it was subsidized, or maybe I thought maybe it would make like no money at all or little money, but to find out that it's subsidized at approximately $2 per passenger mile, that was something I thought was pretty fitting for government. It's essentially the bus is a rolling traffic jam moving slowly in the direction nobody wants to go. And so that's why I told the Democrats they should vote for it, because it was a perfect picture of the government that they were creating.
Yeah, Senate Bill 213 and so many of these other housing bills, land use and zoning, and restricting what local governments can do in terms of deciding how their community should be organized. It just struck me as this Soviet style reorganization of society. As you said, high density along high transit areas to create these worker compounds almost, where everybody can serve the state, as opposed to, maybe grow your own food, have some animals, breathe clean air, be outdoors, kind of live a little bit more of a rural lifestyle. Fortunately, the Democrats this year and Jared Polis don't like that idea.
Well, one thing on 213 is, would have really promoted the ADU thing, which probably works great in Sim City, when you're, but at some point you need to get out of your parents' basement and look at reality. You can't just put a 500 to 800 square foot auxiliary detached unit in everybody's backyard. And what are you going to do with sewer lines? What are you going to do with water lines? What are you going to do with the traffic on the street? The infrastructure is not made for that. But again, they're not anticipating that, because everybody having a battery operated car is not a viable solution. There's not the materials for it. There's not the grid that will sustain it. Currently, electrical electrical cars have, really have twice the pollution footprint of gasoline, or, that has, so, but it's all about, it's about cramming everybody into a small area, and having that centralized control, so they can build this top down utopia. And it's never worked. It has, unless you consider imposing misery as success, which is really a mark of Marxist success. So it does create misery 100% of the time. But yeah, they don't have any. One of the, it's worth noting also where the splitting would not be, and it's away from mass transit lines. So where do these things not really take effect immediately? They don't take effect in the in the gated communities, in the high dollar gated communities. So they're immune. It's just, it's the hoi polloi that that work for a living, that they would have these, and that's consistent with socialism and communism, that you have an upper class of elites, and they don't live the way they force everybody else to.
Yeah. Kind of depressing but shocking, but also I think it is encouraging and kind of gives me some optimism to see how transparent this agenda has become. One of the things that the Democrats have been really trying to push forward is this criminal justice reform, right? Since this whole George Floyd, BLM type of situation years ago, been really on this idea of defunding the police and pushing this, loosening of criminal justice laws. So it's kind of surprised to see how against they were, or how much they opposed your bill on 1086, the Due Process Asset Forfeiture Act. I mean, why didn't Democrats support limiting the government's ability, limiting law enforcement's ability to steal property from people?
Well, on due process asset forfeiture, I should be clear on that one. That was pulled back to an informational bill. That was on the part of talking to the lawyers with whom we were engaged. Due process asset forfeiture, as it's evolved, and in some ways probably because of the past attempts to fix it and keep it in civil asset forfeiture, as they started to unwrap it, and then they were just finding more and more areas where the civil asset forfeiture came to be. So we thought we had a pretty good bill, and then and on the justice review side, they were actually very supportive of it. But then when they said, okay, we have some concerns, we want to get smart on it, and then they started peeling it back a little bit, it was just decided that yes, we want to continue this work, but basically based on the sheer volume of work that they were having to do to support other legislation that was going through. Again, we have this, they're presenting 600 to 700 bills per year, and a lot of them have to go through judicial, that we could either present a bill that could have problems, or not being able to be defensible. And so the reason that it was pulled back was well, basically, I mean, ultimately it was my choice, is to not go forward with the bill that as was written at the time, because it was determined that there was more work that needed to be done to ensure that we don't end up creating more problems than it was worth. So there was a couple extra pieces of data that they said that would really help understand the nature of the issue, and then also the scope of the issue, so that they could, that we can make sure that the legislation actually addresses it, moves it into due process, into the criminal, and doesn't inadvertently create more problems that have to be dealt with in the future. That went in for review, and the overall there was a couple detractors from it. They didn't really give reasons as to why, but overall it was supported. So I think that's actually a good sign on that due process asset forfeiture will be supported. So that one was ultimately pulled back on my account just to make sure that we don't create more problems, to make sure that the actual bill is complete and not something that will create more problems.
Well, I applaud the effort, and I hope it continues to rein in this practice and provide a little bit more due process in this.
Yes, we have that. I think we have a great basis for it. And then what we'll do is we'll continue that. And it might ultimately be the point where it needs to be. And then I'll present it again next year. And then hopefully the vote of confidence this year will carry over into to next year. But I'd say it was pretty well supported. I mean, I do understand where you are with the with a criminal aspect, though, that it does seem like hamstringing law enforcement, which is ironic given the sheer volume of additional laws they create, and then say they want less law enforcement. I'm not really sure how well that goes into their traffic cameras and AI and problems with that.
And it goes into their attack on our gun rights as well, I would say. So this year we saw some of the worst
Sure.
attacks on our Second Amendment rights. What was it like being down at the legislature as this was unfolding?
Again, they just have an agenda. Their worldview, like I said in the what I wrote up for you yesterday, their worldview does not allow them to see that the government has to become the morality in and of itself. It's they don't have there is in their worldview there's no moral law, there's no moral lawgiver, and so it becomes it comes down to forcing people to comply with their agenda. Now that when it's very frustrating when it doesn't make sense, and they make no effort to stop. It's like, well, who's committing these gun crimes? It's not law abiding. It's not people that follow the law. People that follow the law aren't committing crimes. It's people with a history of violence. It's people with that have been convicted. It's but they don't want to do anything about that. It's all of their focus is ultimately on going after law-abiding gun owners, which despite the facts, damn the facts, full speed, full agenda ahead.
Well, you've encouraged Coloradans to stand up and speak out, to get engaged in the process. What is your message to Coloradans who see the problems of the Democrat-led legislature and want to do something about it?
Get engaged. That is the only way. Every voice, and I get it. There's they're going to committee hearings are the place that people really have to to say their piece, and I think it's really important for people to do that. I do understand that it gets frustrating because it seems like they don't listen, but at the same time, that's the only opportunity. That's typically the only time that they are going to be outside of their zone, that they're going to be listening to something other than, so whether it's a constitutional analysis, whether it's just a fact-based analysis, that they're going to hear something other than what they hear in their own echo chamber. And so I think it's important, and it's important in that regard for people to realize, to approach this with that they are the sovereign citizen, that the purpose of government is to secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So in that sense, the legislators, they do work for the people. People need to go in and say, hey, these people, they need to listen to me because they work for me, and the governor works for them. They need to not be intimidated. And we've had some great patriots, especially from here, from El Paso County, and then one phenomenal from Boulder County. So the last bastion of sanity from Boulder County. That they need to approach it and say, this is they need to hear from me. They need to hear my voice. They need to hear what I have to say. They work for me. And typically, they would give 3 minutes of testimony, limited to 10 minutes per panel. Now, with the sheer number of, as more people participate, they limit that to 2 minutes. So, if you can, put together 2 minutes of a discussion of what you want to share, that's actually going to get heard for 2 minutes, as opposed to, I mean, the emails, they don't hurt, but I'd say most people have aides that engage on the emails, or there'll be, a lot of the legislators have like automatic responses and stuff. So if you really want your voice heard, the time to really do it is on committee hearings. Probably the only good thing that came out of COVID is that that's done via Zoom now. So you Zoom in, you go about your day, and then when they're ready for you, they call you, and then you present your 2 minutes. And so I think it's really important that people get engaged with your local Republican Party. Make sure that you're promoting people that have constitutional values, that want to promote the actual values of the Constitution, and get behind them. Because a lot of the problem that we have is because Republicans don't see government as the solution to anything. So they tend not to be involved in government. They just say, well, I mean, and I'm guilty of this. So I'm speaking about myself. So I can say it all in first person. So, I just figured, if there's a Republican in office, they'll do Republican things. And that's not necessarily the case. Democrats, on the other hand, they feel that the government is the solution to everything. They get involved, they get behind their people. They want the government to solve everything. So we need to put people in place to what I would say, stop the good intentions. Like I tell people, today's a good day it's a good day to save the world from good intentions, because, as Marx observed, which I'd say is probably more strategy than just observation, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So we don't necessarily need to have Republicans in there to make more legislation, but we do need more Republicans in there to stop bad legislation and stop the usurpation of individual sovereignty.
Couldn't agree more. Definitely. Definitely. One last question for you. What do you wish you would have known before you began your campaign for State House last year?
What do I wish I would have known? Wow. Just the process, but the process you kind of learn as you go. So I don't think I think I mostly didn't know the level of just disdain. I'd say disdain for the Constitution. That it's not just a level of ignorance that they have; it's a level of disdain for the Constitution itself. So that's disheartening. I guess maybe that would have gotten me involved sooner, more. That. But yeah, I can't really think of any. It's being I spent basically 30 years in the Air Force avoiding politics. So I can't think. Sorry, I'm just drawing a blank on that one, Brandon.
No, that's a great answer. Part of the reason I asked that question is for, people who may be wanting to run for office. 2024 is coming up quickly. I think the Democrats are especially vulnerable this coming election cycle due to some of the bad bills they presented. But there's some really key districts I feel like headway could be made and Republicans can get these Democrats out of office. So part of the reason I asked that question is just what advice, I guess, would you give to somebody who's running for office, who wants to maybe take up that call?
Now, on that regard, I would say recognize that the values, and this is something for Republicans and republicanism in general, but they're only values until you trade them for something you value more. And I think that too often happen. But I think we need to go back to the values of our republic, and that is that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That the purpose of government is to secure those rights, and you know and have an understanding of what it is that's at that's at risk. It's ultimately, the Democrats are coming after your guns, they're coming after their kids, but ultimately they're coming after your individual sovereignty. Now, whether they understand that from their own ideological purposes or not, that's what they're ultimately coming after. They're coming after you, your sovereignty, and making you a subject of the state. So I think Republicans need to recognize that the values of the republic were the most revolutionary in history, and they remain the most revolutionary in history, and that those values of our Declaration of Independence, because that's what we had to go on after, prior to the creation of the Constitution itself, that those values inspired really a backwater group of loosely affiliated colonies, inspired that backwater to stand up against the greatest empire in the world. So if those colonials could stand up to the greatest empire of the world and ultimately prevail, those are the values, I think, that will move the Republican Party forward, because they're actually motivational and they're revolutionary. I don't like the word conservative in that sense, because it's a Marxist term in the Communist Manifesto, meaning not revolutionary enough. Where conservatives in the conservative movement consider it, hey, we need to keep what worked. The things that have worked, but ultimately what works is this still revolutionary ideal that we are created in the image of God, that stands out from history, and be able to and that resonates with people. That still resonates with people because we know it's true. Even when I was talking to my neighbor who was a communist, and you talk about talking about what I would consider the scale, I consider the scale between, you have individual sovereignty on the right, and that would be Declaration of Independence, and then you have your Hegelian God state on the left, your Marxist / Hegelian God state on the left. And where do you put yourself in there? Well, most people will want to be more towards the individual sovereignty, and then you can start the conversation and say, well, how do you have this individual sovereignty if you continue to compromise with government and move towards the Hegelian God state? And so I think Republicans going into it just need to brush up and get into build a deck, refinish your bathroom, listen to a lot of David Barton and a lot of Thomas Sowell, and a lot of and really understand the history and the basis for our republic, and why those values were and are revolutionary and inspiring.
Well, that's great. Absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Representative DeGraaf. I really appreciate your time. Please let me know anything I can do in the future to help you and help restore some sanity, some truth, and some liberty to our great state of Colorado.
Yeah, I will. I think keeping people informed and letting them know what's going on is certainly the way to go.
Perfect. Well, thank you and take care.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. It's good chatting with you.